Welcome to DIA Today, Democracy in America Today. I'm Matt Parks alongside Dave Corbin. Glad to have you with us as we explore the ideas behind the day's headlines.
My left eye sees pollution. Those dirty fuels are burning. The earth's whole climate's churning. Clean energy solution. My right eye scans the bill. Fossil fuels are cheap. Wind and solar too steep. Drill, baby, drill. Predefined, misaligned, polarized division. Shuttered mind, worse than blind. 2020 vision.
How's your week going, Dave?
Probably harder than yours. I mean, you're like off now, right? School's over. You have 4 months to do nothing. Just play golf.
Pretty much just breezing through it. Yeah. Somehow it doesn't really work that way for Interim Provost, but it's definitely lighter. It's certainly quieter. I'll say that much. You know, where the provost office is at King's, it's sort of in a back corner anyway. It's a quiet spot. But, yesterday, mid-morning, I was going around turning a few lights on just so I wouldn't stumble over things because nobody else was around. So, yeah, it's definitely a time where you can get some things done. The email volume is down about 30%. So that's a positive.
Okay.
How are things in Boerne?
Well, I'm not interim, so
yeah, right.
No deal. It's good. It's
good.
There are a lot of things going on at Geneva. A lot of good things. One of the things we do is senior thesis, where students have to write a paper and then by recall give a 20-minute presentation. Just speak it out loud, which I think is a really neat exercise. So
yeah,
those have been good. And there's just every grade level K through 12 is having some sort of end of year thing, which is neat. One of my favorite things I've seen thus far, they do something in the grammar school called character traits, where a teacher chooses a word and then tells a story about each student, and says that that character trait stands out for the student. So that was done for Eliza yesterday, and she was a servant leader.
Good.
She wanted love, but she got servant leader. And today is Jack this afternoon. So
okay,
really a neat exercise. I thought it might be neat. They were able to kind of list all of the character traits the teachers had chosen for them if they been here for some time, and how those might play into the thesis that someone chose. Very Aristotelian. So
yeah, well, a little different from our tradition back at ECCS in New Hampshire, where the last day of school we would do the headmaster's revenge, where I would give a joke award that was sometimes a little passive aggressive for each student, but they would look forward to it. It was great. It was kind of a lot of pressure because you would have students, 4 or 5, one student 7 years trying to come up with a new thing every year. Their character develops and evolves a little bit, but they're kind of the same person year after year. So it's not always easy, but there's some incident or something you memorialize. Anyway, that was like the latest night I would ever stay up. I'd be up at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, trying to figure out that last student or two and whatever the joke was that connected one to the next. So in the last couple of years, I would take occasional notes just so I'd remember, an incident, just so I could recall it at the time. But
I'll share that idea with folks here. We may have some folks kind of at the upper levels who are wanting to do that, because we also had senior prank day. So I'm sure that that there'd be a lot of reverse pranks.
There's to be some payback, right? There's a little bit of payback involved in that. There's a few messages that I sent to the parents too, about what you should send or not send with your child for lunch, snacks, and desserts. So sometimes you have to communicate with humor what you can't communicate otherwise. So
agreed. All right. Well, Aristotle, book 8. We're at the last book. And speaking of pranks and end of the school year, he ends on a very education-centric note. He writes at the beginning of chapter 1 of book 8 that no one will doubt that the legislator should direct his attention above all to the education of youth, for the neglect of education does harm to the Constitution. The citizen should be molded to suit the form of government under which he lives. For each government has a peculiar character, which originally formed and which continues to preserve it, end quote. So if you are a lawmaker, education is central to your endeavor. And you have to think through, what is it that your regime aspires to, and how can you have an educational program that fits that aspiration, that helps secure that aspiration. So the first thing we think about, of course, right, is we live in the year 2022, and a question that we've had as we've gone through Tocqueville and now Aristotle is, are we living within a democratic republic any longer? It was framed that way over 200 years ago. It certainly has undergone a transformation. There's definitely a lot of angst and ugly sentiment and antagonism that exists today, that there's a fight over what the regime will be. And I think that it's really kind of left up in the air, the question of what type of education ought we to want for ourselves. And I think that you often hear people today argue that, we've got to figure out a way how to train these kids to be more civil. What tends toward civility, what tends toward peace. And it's good that conversation is taking place, because I think for a long time, most of the conversation around education looked to the particular or private end of just achieving success, which meant doing the work that you need to do in order to have the skill set where you can work on a certain occupational pursuit and make a lot of money doing that. Now, no doubt that still exists, but I think it's interesting and good that living in a time that's troubling, we're beginning to ask these fundamental Aristotelian questions again.
Yeah, thinking about how the role of character fits into an education. Think about the role of, or the relationship between education and the regime. This is a very interesting question. You were talking about the fact that we have certain understanding of our regime historically, which is maybe being challenged, has been challenged in many ways over the last century. And I think one of the ironies, if you think about the educational scene today, and we've both had a whole career in education, and we've taught at public and private institutions of various sorts and various levels. It's really the private schools that are doing the most work on behalf of the regime. Yeah. The public schools are laboring to undermine the regime quite explicitly in some cases, and maybe not always directly with that in view in other cases. But really, if you were to look at the typical education that one receives at University of New Hampshire or other public institutions and public schools, K through 12 level, this is, of course, where much the controversy is around school boards and CRT and all these kinds of topics. The effort that's being made there in terms of the basic orientation of the student they're trying to produce is one that would be antithetical to the basic principles of our republic. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, quite contrary, I think, to Aristotle's expectation, perhaps, private education, the kind that you're doing at Geneva, the kind that we're doing at King's and other places that are similarly minded, although our ultimate purpose actually isn't to support the state, right? We have a higher goal in view where we're aiming to glorify God. But along the way, we're actually preparing good citizens whose character and habits would be quite supportive of the republic that the public institutions are largely abandoning.
Yeah, and I think at the heart of that project, or at least how it was envisioned, both at King's and Geneva, there is great belief in the truth of the Word of God, in the standard of absolute truth, and that propels everything forward, right? That, what are we to do? We are to try to understand who He is and how He would have us live. So that project then lends itself to, I think, other commitments. And so the commitment to truth can lend itself to the commitment to justice. It can lend itself to the things that are supportive of a regime. But if you believe that truth is relative, or that truth is made or undone simply by attaining power, then your understanding of your regime, your understanding of your community is going to be one in which you're always kind of trying to figure out, well, who was stronger when, and then the game becomes not to try to figure out what the truth is, what the truth of the matter is, but how can I acquire power and then exert that power? And I mean, that's the fundamental question. And right, the book on education, Plato's Republic. I mean, you see it, in Proverbs as well, and throughout the Bible, that, is this a matter of truth, or is this a matter of power? Right. The old question, what is truth? So I think that, Aristotle has really, kind of made an argument that you can arrive at truth, that you can think through rational principle and arrive at truth. And applied to the regime better believe in the truth of the regime, or it soon will go out of being.
Right. I think that's, as you're saying, that's really the challenge in our own day, right? That the regime and the ruling class in the regime no longer believes in that, but believes in something else, or maybe, just like you're saying, believes primarily in power and its own moral virtue, and therefore it's the goodness of whatever it does with that power. Then that creates a very different context for education. And you raise questions about the content of education as well. Are we trying to prepare people for careers? Are we trying to mold character? Or, those are big questions too, that I think it's great that Aristotle leads us into, because that becomes a point of debate and discussion all the time. And I think it's one of the weaknesses, honestly, on the conservative side in its critique of higher ed, which of course has many strong points to it as you look at what's going on in the general landscape of higher ed. But there tends to be more of a utilitarian focus and a lack of appreciation for the humanities and for education of character and soul, and the kinds of things that you're doing at Geneva, we're doing at King's, with a very different perspective from the typical school and the public sector, and yet maybe not quite appreciated by at least certain elements on the right as they critique our education system today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more that this claim by many on the right that because higher education has been vulgarized, that lower education ought to be our horizon. And I think that sometimes that comes with the right appreciation for hard work and grit and the things that it takes to make something run, but at the expense, that should not be at the expense of thinking and looking and turning your eyes to the higher things, and to the seminal questions. What is the best love? What does it mean to be virtuous? What type of virtue is essential to the good life, intellectual or moral virtue? What type of knowledge ought we try to acquire? Useful knowledge or higher knowledge? These are questions, right, that Aristotle brings up as he moves through the beginning of Book 8. And if you're not interested in those questions, then you really have kind of just cut off an essential part of human dignity. And so you've just kind of taken that out of your life, and you tend to become more of an automaton. And you may be an efficient automaton, but an efficient automaton is not a human being.
You can own the libs, and you can poo-poo Shakespeare and score some cheap populist points, but you're going to miss an awful lot if you don't read Shakespeare. So there's a good way to engage the humanities that really is the story of Western civilization for millennia. And the fact that it's been corrupted in the last 50 years by people who want to tear down Western civilization, it's not really a good reason to abandon Shakespeare, Augustine, Plato, Aristotle, and the rest of that great tradition.
Yeah, it's a pretty good thing at the end of the day for your life if you've read Macbeth. It kind of, especially if you have any talent at all or any ambition, it's probably a good thing that you read him. So, I mean, Aristotle's not unaware, right, that education could go in the wrong direction, because, he'll suggest here, right, that oftentimes these questions might be set aside or not considered. And then he also writes that, okay, well, people have different ideas about what virtue is. And even that disagreement or having the different ideas could lead to not practicing it, because one person thinks it's X and another person thinks it's Y. But I think that he comes out at a pretty good place here, that, that whenever you're thinking about what you ought to be doing, you ought to be thinking about whether or not it is liberating to the human being, liberating in a good way, securing for that individual, right, a freedom that only human beings are able to have. And that secondly, is whatever you're doing producing liberality within the soul or illiberality? And this goes to the question of, right, power, right? Right. The person who, in the basic definition of the word, who is liberal, is fair, is just, is accurate, renders to another, what ought to be rendered, and doesn't seek for themselves something that they ought not to possess. And these are great human traits. So education ought to aim toward that end. And I think if we take into account everything he said in the politics, you get into trouble, right, when you don't have these traits, and you're more likely to have a better peace, live more peaceably with others if you do have them. So it's no surprise that he ends here in book 8.
I think you're making a great point that the kind of person that comes out of the right kind of education is a person with a kind of generosity, with a willingness to engage other people in a way that recognizes their common humanity, that isn't aiming for the cheap rhetorical win, or just to score points or dunk on somebody, or just, kind of show off their superiority in some way, or force others to conform, just all those kinds of things, which are really so characteristic of our politics today, that there's a different model here, and it's a quaint term, the model of the gentleman, right? You think about that 19th century, say, British ideal, where the gentleman rightly realized, properly executed, as it were, that ideal achieved is something that is admirable and lacking too much in our politics. We're coming off some primary elections last night, and you just kind of look at what is it that carries you through the Republican primary these days. It's not being a gentleman, and it's not being somebody who's a thoughtful defender of the regime. Those aren't the qualities that are currently desired. And so there's going to be consequences for that. When people that are right, maybe more often than not on policy, are wrong on matters of character, and maybe no more wrong than their opponents, but wrong too, that's not good for the regime. Right? That's going to lead to a further coarsening of politics, greater division, more enemies, less friends, and less peace.
Right. So this, then when he turns to the types of learning, these would be common to us, although we might not pick this list of 4 that he picks: reading and writing, gymnastic exercises, music, and drawing, these things that are fundamental means of education. You could see how the means fit with the ends that he suggested here at the beginning of book 8. In particular, when he talks about gymnastic exercises, do we do athletics in order to become wolf-like and ravage, on the weak, or do we learn gymnastics so that we can become like a lion, noble, one who is courageous? Who, yes, has strength, but employs that strength toward a noble end. And, here in chapter 3 and 4, he's very critical of the Spartans who, yes, they at a time learned how to practice gymnastics better than others, or perhaps they were focused on that and others were not. But at the end of the day, if they didn't hold up the model of the lion, more the model of the wolf, in becoming wolf-like, they swallow themselves up as well. So just to kind of further emphasis on this point, that the means that you use ought to be in alignment with the end that you seek. And on second point on this, that that requires having what we'd call downtime, peace, or leisure, but not an amusement that tends towards sloth, but peace and relaxation that tends towards contemplation, right? Yeah. Thinking about higher things, and this is essential to him.
Yeah, this is where he gets into music, which is interesting, and this is another place where you can see differences over the last 75 or so years in our culture, right? With the emergence of popular music and the way that influences the culture versus other kinds of music, right? Traditional music, classical, other genres. And, some of the early critiques, I remember reading, Richard Weaver in the 1950s, his concerns about jazz, and the kind of the direction that was taking people with the appeal to emotions. And of course, then what follows from that is the emergence of rock and roll. And, sort of the way that the genres of music that have emerged in those decades have shaped the souls of young people, right? Like that's a major influence on young people, far beyond maybe anything they're studying in the classroom. And so thinking about where that music is leading people, right? Is it elevating the sentiments? Is it guiding the soul towards something excellent? You think about the ultimate realization of the highest ends of humanity, and the images you get in the book of Revelation of this heavenly choir, that there's millions upon millions of people joining in, praising God. Worthy is the Lamb, whatever the tune is, right? More glorious than Handel. And so at its highest, right, the greatest expression perhaps of praise for God might very well be all those human voices singing with the angels his praises. But of course, music can take you in a very, very different direction. And so it's important to think about, right? Because the way that it influences the soul, perhaps without us realizing what's happening.
So once again, a plug for Shakespeare, the man who has no music in himself, nor is not moved with concord of sweet sounds, is fit for treasons, stratagems, and spoils. The motions of his spirit are dull as night, and his affections dark as Erebus. Let no such man be trusted. Mark the music, right? You always need to mark the music to understand the day that you live in. And music can be inspirational, aspirational, or it can, the type of music that if you have a music in yourself that is of discord, it can likewise produce discord. So from Aristotle to Shakespeare to 2022, which is why all things are good in Texas, because there's just so many country music stations.
Yeah, well, I remember, watching The Matrix when that came out, whenever that was, 25 years ago. And the first movie was kind of interesting. And so when the second one came out, I watched that one. And you got to the point where you kind of got their vision of what freedom was, like what, if you were resisting the oppressive regime that was all around you, and it was a rave, it was a rave. And I thought, okay, that's it. I'm done with The Matrix, right? Because that there was something they missed it, right? Like they missed like music, yes, like important, but that expression of just sort of giving yourself over to the passions as the highest expression of freedom misses the mark.
Well, more to come. One more week, right? Finish up book 8, finish up the politics next week. So
yep. So we're going to wrap up the show with Tocqueville's crystal ball. So we're now 2 rounds into the basketball playoffs and 1 round into the NHL playoffs. So let's check in a little bit on our picks before we make some new picks moving forward. So in the East, it's now down to the Celtics and the Heat. So Dave, you have the Heat going all the way. So you're still alive there. I had the Bucks, which of course lost in Game 7 to the Celtics. Some good consolation there that it was Boston that that defeated the team that I had predicted. And so maybe you have the same kind of feeling about this Eastern Conference final. Can't really lose, right? If the Celtics make it to the finals, great. If they don't, you were right about the Heat. Out west, it's kind of the opposite. So you had the Suns, of course, who lost badly in that Game 7 against Dallas. Yeah, wild. And I have Golden State as my eventual champion, so they're still alive. We'll see how they do against Dallas. NHL, both of our picks for the finalists survived the first round. So you had the number 1 seeds, I had the number 2, so they're both still going. So yeah, I'd say overall so far so good. But we only got 2 episodes left, as you mentioned, and so we're going to branch out a little bit, looking at the sports calendar coming up. We got one of the majors this week in golf, PGA Championship. And next Saturday, is soccer's biggest, at least club prize, Champions League final. So we'll talk about that one next week. The golf's always tough, right? Huge field, obviously. So picking a single champion is difficult. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you 5 pairs of players, Dave, and you tell me which one will do better. And then I will ask you for your champion at the end, but we'll focus on these 5 pairs first. So first pair, Tiger Woods against Rory McIlroy.
I'm going to take Rory McIlroy there. So playing well of late.
Yeah. You never want to underestimate Tiger because, you think about 3 times his career should have been over. And certainly coming after his car accident, you think never going to play again. And here he is. But I do think McIlroy still outplays him. All right. Second pair, the Texas Bros. Jordan Spieth, your favorite. Justin Thomas. Who do you like?
Spieth, of course. No doubt.
All right. Yeah, he's coming off a runner-up finish last week, so he's playing well. That putter can betray him at the wrong moment sometimes, and an occasional drive that goes astray, but his iron play is unbelievable. And if he can make enough putts and keep the driver in play, he's always a threat. I'm going to take Thomas. I think Thomas is also playing well, and probably both are, top 15, top 10 finishes, but I'm going to take Thomas just ahead of Spieth. Third pair, we have the world number 1, believe it or not, Scottie Scheffler. Came out of nowhere, winning almost every other week this year. And then the world number 2, Jon Rahm.
Going to go with Jon Rahm here.
Yeah, actually, I went to a golf tournament once a few years ago. Caleb and I went, and we watched a group that was, at that time, it was Vijay Singh, who, of course, was a former number 1 player, and then Jon Rahm, who at that point was, just starting his professional career. He'd been number 1 amateur, but we walked around, and it was like 10 people following them around the course. And, it was Rahm's like high school buddy or college buddy and his girlfriend. And, Vijay Singh just kind of grinding out there. Didn't really have anyone, he's a little past his prime, but it was great. It was an unbelievable experience. So I'm going to take Rahm as well. All right. Fourth pair, we've got Dustin Johnson against Brooks Koepka. Two fun majors players. Johnson often falling just short in the majors. Of course, Koepka with an amazing record of winning majors and not much else, but certainly seems to rise to the challenge this time of year.
I'm going to go with Koepka. I think that, you're right. I mean, he's won this thing twice. So I think he'll be in there this again. So
yeah, I would take him, but he's had some injury issues. So I'm going to say DJ beats him out. I don't think either of them wins the tournament, but I think Johnson ends up ahead. Last pair, just for fun. Of course, just like some of the other majors, the PGA allows some of its former champions to play, even if they can't otherwise qualify for PGA Tour events. So we got John Daly, the 1991 PGA champion, 56 years old, and probably biologically about 75, given all he's done to himself over the years, against Shawn Michael, who's regarded as probably the least likely PGA champion, 53-year-old, won back in 2003. They're teeing off first tomorrow, 8 a.m. first group off the tees with one other player. Get them out of the way, I guess. But they might both shoot 85. Who knows? But anyway, which one finishes better between those two, Dave?
You got to go with John Daly. Just to have to, just
okay.
For the character, it's, in and of itself.
It's just.
Speaking of Aristotle.
Yes, exactly. A great model of Aristotelian virtues. All right, I'm going to take Daly also. Yeah, he's still playing on the Champions Tour a bit, and every once in a while he'll get an invitation from a sponsor to play a PGA Tour event. So I think he's probably in a little better form than Michael, but we'll see. All right, overall champion, who you got?
Spieth.
It's gotta be Spieth. Okay,
Yeah.
Figured you'd pick him. I'm going to take Colin Morikawa, who's the world number 3, and certainly just a nice, consistent game, which is usually the kind that succeeds with the PGA. So, all right, we'll check in on that next week. In the meantime, thank you as always for listening. Please remember you can subscribe and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. You can also contact us at democracyinamericatoday@gmail.com. We'll talk to you soon.
2020 vision.